everyone, to the R.E.S.T podcast, where our goal is to help each and every one of you displace confusion, chaos, and dis-ease in order to heal and find significance in life. I am your host, Natalie Roberts, and I am here with the author of the Reconstitution Method for Healing and Rest, Virginia Dixon.
For those of you that have been with us for a while, since the beginning of the podcast, you know that we are about displacing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease in order to live free. I have a special guest today that represents everything that is embodied in the message of rest. And I want you to hear her story. Her name is Leslie Lamb. Welcome, Leslie.
Thanks for having me, Virginia.
It's been almost 8 years since I first met you. And every time I think of you, I think that you embody what I knew 40-some years ago I was going to have to be prepared to do. And I knew that the times that I was growing up in and the spheres of influence that I was a part of and that was educating me, I knew that something had to change, that something was wrong. There was too much emerging confusion, chaos, and dis-ease way back then when it came to history, government, and education, frankly. History being the root cause of something. Government being people's capacity to navigate their conscience, right? To govern, to direct, regulate, control, and restraint. And education is the kinds of conversations we're having to communicate ideas, right? So intuitively, I knew that how we navigated that conversation, first in our primary spheres of influence, meaning our own personal lives, our conscience, right? And then our relationships, our communities, and our state and our nation would have significant consequences. So without getting too abstract, that is the heartbeat of rest, is to displace confusion, chaos, and dis-ease by giving people a broader understanding of history, of government, and of education in such a way that it can be transformative in their personal lives. Because I clearly saw that what was eroding, what was diminishing, was people's capacity to reason well through thoughts, ideas, messages, curriculum, without either dismissing the importance of these things or engaging in arguments and being combative about them. They were just kind of these two extremes, right? But your whole story and how you came to rest and how we met really encompasses this unconventional approach to healing and wellness in the midst of an unbelievable story of pain and loss and addiction and confusion and chaos and dis-ease. I was so compelled by your commitment to persevere in the midst of all those things, knowing that you would prevail in time or outside of time, but you would prevail. And your story would not have the end that everybody expected, including yourself. So I want our listening audience to hear, first of all, how you came to rest. Secondly, what was your experience here and weave it into the narrative of your story, what brought you to us, because you take unconventional approaches to everything and you persevere knowing that you will prevail even if it's going to kill you. And I want people to find hope in your story.
Yeah, thanks so much, Virginia, for that. Gosh, where to start? I often tell people, my husband and I have a company called Cultural Architects, and it's a leadership and development company. And my husband actually holds a legitimate doctorate. And I like to tell people that I also hold a doctorate, and it's from the School of Hard Knocks.
Yeah.
And we all come from different backgrounds, and I often say that I was raised by a pack of wolves. That's not too far from the truth. What I came out of in an abusive, alcoholic home. And it was a long, conventional journey for many years, going after all of the conventional ways to heal. Yeah, heal. And so I did all the things.
How about heal or survive, huh?
Both, right?
Yeah.
Right? You said something a moment ago about making up my mind, right? And the fact of the matter is when I came to you, to rest, my mind was anything but clear. I was in the height of confusion and chaos and pain. And there is something about the human spirit that carries us. Doesn't matter where you land in spiritual matters, but we are fearfully and wonderfully made beings. We're body, soul, and spirit, and I think it's the spirit of a person, the essence, the life force of a person that urges them on to persevere. But when I came to rest, I had been persevering for many, many years. But here's the key. For me, I was doing it in my own strength. And my chaos and my addiction and my confusion, my mental illness, all of that was very hidden. And I survived in my own strength. And I had exhausted all of the conventional resources of modern medicine and medications and therapies and modalities. I had tried them all that were available to me at that point in time. And so when I came to rest, I really was at that place of if I can't figure something out here, I'm going to die.
I remember those were your first words to me. I've tried, and I'm at the end of my rope.
Yeah.
If I don't do something, I will die.
Yeah.
Your brother had passed away.
I lost a brother to alcoholism and mental illness, and my father also died from the effects of alcoholism. Yeah.
So there's a whole heritage component.
Mm-hmm. And also mental illness on my maternal side of the family. There was schizophrenia, and I got a really lovely deck of cards when I started off.
Give us a little bit about your background. You grew up in a home. There was alcoholism by the age of 14. Your mom divorced your father.
Yes,
is that right?
14, 15, she finally mustered the courage to leave a really unhealthy marriage that she had tolerated for many years. My brothers were already gone out of the house, and it was just me. And I was given the choice. And I chose to stay behind with my dad, who was the alcoholic abuser in the family dynamic. I chose to stay behind for a lot of really wrong reasons. And without getting too deep into the weeds on that, in my young heart, I believed some really serious lies. And the primary lie was that if only I could do better, if I would stay behind and take care of him and be what he needed, that I would earn his love and his acceptance, and then I would be okay.
And he groomed you for that because he had transferred much of the affection from your mom to you. And he wasn't kind to her. He didn't honor her. He didn't respect her. That turned into somewhat of an abusive relationship.
Yeah,
Is that accurate?
And anybody that grows up in an alcoholic pick your addiction. It doesn't have to be alcohol. It can be drugs. It can be pornography. It can be shopping, gambling. Pick your poison, right? That in those homes, nobody gets in and nobody gets out.
So well put.
Yeah. Interesting dynamic around that. You use the word grooming. I think in my case, I really don't believe that my dad was consciously aware, but neuroscience has finally caught up with some other very ancient thinkings that up to 95% of our thinking is actually occurring at a subconscious level. We're not aware of the thoughts and the beliefs that are driving our feelings and our behaviors. But every feeling that you experience, every behavior that you do is birthed in a belief or a thought in your heart, in your mind, right? That's that mind part of our soul, our mind, our will, our emotions. And of course, that gets translated up into the operating system, our brain. But there are ways to get down into that subconscious. And one of the biggest gifts that I was able to pull out of my season of rest with you was exposing those beliefs and that deep thinking in my heart. And those thoughts and those beliefs come out of trauma oftentimes, right? Science also shows that when in a heightened state of emotional arousal or trauma, if you will, our DNA actually shakes for information. And when the stories, you talk so beautifully about story in your work, and when an inaccurate story drops in, whether it's something somebody in our life told us about, or if it was something, in the ethereal realm, whatever that comes in, or even something just generated out of our own thinking, it gets locked into our DNA and it gets locked into our physiology, which is why the work that you do is so significant, because the body does keep the score. What's that saying? Something about being buried alive. There's a phrase, I can't think of it
Feelings
right now.
buried alive never die.
That's it.
And the stories of our ancestors stay with us.
Indeed.
Okay, so jumping into 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, you marry, you have children. Talk a little bit, just briefly, so they have context for how you got here.
Yeah, I'll give you the really fast and dirty. So I ended up being a single mother at barely 18 years old, and I was on my own. I had a full-time job. I was finishing school, raising a baby on my own. And a few years later, I met a man. I married him. I had another child. And within a year and a half, thankfully it wasn't a long time, we discovered that he was a pedophile, and that he had actually got his claws into my first child, who would have been in the 3 to 5 year old range at the time. And so that, as you can imagine, was
devastating.
It was devastating. It was devastating to the child. It was devastating to me. It buried in these very early stories about my identity, about myself, that I was, in addition to being a wonderful alcoholic, my dad was also a misogynist. He hated women. So when I was growing up, I would hear some pretty awful things that aren't even worthy of repeating here. But basically, I came out of my childhood believing that because I was born a female, I was less than. I wasn't worthy. I didn't deserve love. And so when this terrible, tragic event happened in my first marriage, that just carved another path, another neural pathway in my belief system, and also in my natural brain, that, see, you're not worthy. You're not lovable. And so my life was a progression of that. Even though I was very successful in my career, every time a man was promoted over me that I trained or whatever, and there was a perceived or actual rejection, there you go. There's another groove in that belief system in my thinking that proved. See, what we don't realize is, because we're unaware of what's going on at a heart level, a subconscious level, that's what drives us. And we go out into life and we're not aware of it most of the time, but we're looking for evidence to support the story that we believe.
Comfort. There's a measure of comfort in that, and familiarity.
Yeah. And so that marriage ended. I was a single mom for several years, remarried again, another great choice. This time it was a man of the cloth who ended up fleecing me out of everything that I had worked for, and had done his fair measure of abuse of of the kids as well. And there's still
verbal abuse.
Yeah, and there's still wreckage from that, but that's slowly being restored. So that marriage ended, and I thought, okay, I'm done. And I dove in a third time. I know it's hard to believe, like, how stupid is this woman? This is what ingrained patterns of thinking that you're unaware of do to you. They drive your behavior. And so I took another dive, and this time thinking, oh, well, this person's never been married before and they've never had children, and this will be perfect. There's no baggage. One of the best things that's ever happened to me in that particular marriage, psychologist, I had met with him alone. It was a marriage psychologist. And he said, Leslie, let me ask you a couple questions here, because your husband's not with you. I'm like, okay, go ahead. And he goes, so let's get the story straight. Your first husband was pedophile. Your second husband was,
crook.
A crook who fleeced you. And your current husband is by all accounts, a narcissist. So what's the common denominator here? And it was a slap upside my head. Well, we all know the common denominator was me. And so what was it that was going on in me? Don't think for 1 second you don't put off an attraction for what you're unaware of it, but you're trying to reconcile the chaos and disease that's going on inside of you. Mm-hmm. And you end up attracting the very thing that you're trying to reconcile. It's really, really curious how we do that.
But I'll never forget the day we were talking, and I'm glad you brought that up yesterday, because I'd forgotten it. But immediately in one of our first meetings, I said, you're living as a victim. You grew up. Talk about that for a
girlfriend,
minute.
that was the second. I was going to get there. So that first upside my head was that doctor that pointed out the blinding flash of the obvious, the BFO, that I was the common denominator. And it was really a beautiful gift, because it really, that was a pivotal moment. I think all of us can look back on our lives and pinpoint times or seasons or situations that really shifted the trajectory of our lives. And that was one of those key things, because it caused me then to quit blaming all of external forces and really start to take a look at the inside. But I was doing it on my own, and I was a hot mess. And so when I came to Virginia and to R.E.S.T, in one of our first meetings, she looked me right in the eye and she said, you're a victim. And I was furious. Like, I can remember, if that's the last word anybody who knows me would ever use to describe me. Do you know what I've overcome and what I've done? And I just launched into this very aggressive defense of every reason why I was anything but a victim. And I remember driving home that afternoon, and I was having a temper tantrum all the way home. And I finally got home, and I finally got quiet, and I settled myself into the heart of who I was. And I was like, oh crap, she's right.
But when you think about the circumstances, the ecosystem, if you will, in your home during those developmental years, you had to be compliant to those in authority over you. Yeah. And even if you would have responded in rage, you're still young without power or authority to do anything. So it's the compliance that comes with being in the midst of confusion, chaos, and disease that creates the victimhood.
Right. And that's really key, because when we're children, we are victimized.
100%.
Yeah. But when we're adults, this is why
you have to choose to stay there, right?
Right. And I work with a lot of people from a trauma place now too. And many times, and there's just a lot of documentation around this, people when they reach, that 30, 35 age range is oftentimes when a lot of sexual abuse starts coming up to the surface. Yeah. Because the human brain is so fascinating how it almost creates a protector that helps us forget the trauma, but our bodies keep the score, and that trauma will eventually make its way out. It has to, because we're designed that way. We can't hold on to that. This is the origin of disease, by the way, when the body continues to hold on and doesn't release that stuff. And so when we're children and we're true victims, if we have not had somebody in our life that can help us flush it out, navigate, rewrite the story, that stuff gets super pressed down, but it's still driving our behavior and our feelings. And for me, my own journey around addiction with alcohol was just that. I was seeking comfort when in reality, what a drug or a substance or an addictive behavior does for you is what's the word we were talking about earlier today? It anesthetizes you. But that's not the same thing as comfort. It's a counterfeit to comfort. You were sharing earlier with me today about tea versus cocktail hour.
That's right.
Yeah.
When at the end of a hard day, every day, well, just at the end of a day, of a schooling day, I always had tea for my kids. We had tea, and we had tea after dinner, and it was just almost a ritual. And I thought, tea time or cocktail hour, I realized that the same thing that cocktail hour does for people, tea time did for us. And even now, when we're having a significant conversation, a meaningful anything, or even when we're together, the question is, Mom, can I fix you a cup of tea?
Yeah.
And I believe they do that for each other. And it brings memories of something that is divine.
Yeah.
Because it feeds the soul. Divine things feed the soul.
Indeed.
Dark things extinguish the life of the soul.
That is so true.
And when you were talking today about the function that alcohol had in the narrative of your own story, because it did reach the levels of where you thought, I'm not going to survive this.
Drink myself to death.
It's amazing the amount of alcohol you could consume.
I'm Irish.
Yeah. But it's amazing. And I just realized what alcohol did for you, tea does for me. Even today.
Right, but tea is pure, right? Tea nurtures the body. And of course, we know what alcohol does to it. It does just the opposite. It is such a counterfeit comfort. All addiction is a counterfeit comfort.
That's so good.
I will share this because I think it's relevant. I wasn't a one and done. My journey around drinking was a start, stop for years and years and years.
What does that mean? Start, stop.
Yeah. So not drink, right? And went through the whole conventional recovery that people do. And there's benefits to that. I'm not poo-pooing the whole recovery movement, right? But it does not set a person free. And so I would have long stretches where I wouldn't touch alcohol, but I would always find my way back. And I believe the reason why is because I will go so far as to say every issue that the human race faces is an identity issue. I always look around the world, we have an identity crisis. And I'm not talking about necessarily sexual identity. That's not where I'm going with this. I'm talking about we don't know who we are. And until we reconcile that, we're going to continue to go back to those things that are familiar and comfortable because we don't understand the magnificence, frankly, of our creation.
That's right.
And when we come into the revelation of that old way of thinking no longer dominates our soul, our mind, our will, and our emotions.
Right, because the purpose of that identity isn't to determine what you're going to do, but it will define who you're going to be. And that is the distinction.
It is about beingness.
What you said.
Thank you for
right.
saying that. We have a saying, know, be, do, right? You've got to know who you are and embody that. You've got to be that. Be what you know is the truth. We're all on a quest to find the truth. What is the way? How do I define who I am? That's a question that, frankly, must be answered if you're going to walk in the fullness of your life.
And that is the seed of rest. That is the aim of rest. And I watch you do it with so much tenacity, perseverance, with so much consistency. And the thing that I observed emerge, and I see this 100% of the time, people that go through our program, and it's not a 1 or a 2 week thing.
Sure.
It's a lifestyle thing. And to learn a lifestyle, as you know, you've got to delve deep into these ideas, into the language, into how we communicate, into how we process information. But once we do it, it's so integrative and it's so practical that the transformation really comes relatively easy because it does access this spiritual constitution of who we are.
100%.
And intuitively, right, the comfort we're seeking is because something inside says, wait a minute, I can see that I'm meant for more than this, but I'm trying to satisfy my value, my worth, who I am, and who I'm supposed to be, not do, right? In the context of all these external things that don't matter. And so when we reach all these dead ends, of course we're going to go shop, drink, have sex, do all these other things to satisfy that hole in us. And it's only God, and I believe, and I'm verbal about this, and the power and the authority of the Holy Spirit that indwells us, that can clear that kind of fog. And although I don't make a huge platform of that, that is the seed of our value and our worth and our purpose, is knowing that God is. But I saw that compel you and drive you in the darkest moments of your life. I watched it happen with your third husband. We had an encounter here in this family room, and I want you to talk about that for a minute, because I think that was the third defining point from my perspective, that I knew you were either going to die or this was the point of no return. You were going to be free.
Yeah, there are certainly, I will say, forces that mix with our wounded souls. And I was here at the villa with that particular spouse, and I want to say this from a place of encouragement. Don't be alone. Do not get into agreement that there is not help and that it's up to you, or that nobody cares, or that you're not worth saving, because you are. And on that day, I'm even looking across the room, and we were sitting, my spouse at the time and I were sitting on the sofa, and Virginia was talking with us, and as he
got worked up, and I didn't realize I was doing it. We need mirrors, guys. We need mirrors in our lives. And I didn't know I was doing it at the time until Virginia mirrored it to me. But I was all but disappearing in that sofa as he rose up. By the way, I've never, ever seen anybody disappear, recoil so quickly, and so in such a dark way, so fast.
It was really fascinating, but it was also a moment of breakthrough, because what ensued after that afternoon and the work that we continue to do together,
he stormed out of here.
He did.
Mm-hmm. But I want to say something. Kudos to you, because your first response, oh, Virginia, thank you. I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed. I'm so sorry. And then you said, I think I need to leave. I said, absolutely not. Our time's not up. I still have another hour and a half. Do you remember that?
Oh, that was already after 4 hours.
That particular day, I had met with you and he joined us, but I still had time in that segment of the appointment.
Yeah.
I tend to go in deep and aggressive with and saturate situations. Once you cut somebody open, or once somebody is willing to open up, you can't just finish because the time's up 45 minutes into a discussion. So I'd seen Leslie alone that day, and then her spouse joined us. So he only lasted here less than 30 minutes. And I remember looking at Leslie and I said, absolutely not. I still have an hour and a half left. And you were almost shaking.
Yeah.
And I had never seen that happen in real time. But I want to say something. Kudos to you. You said, okay. And it's almost like you went into like a childlike state. And I said, let's go into the war room. So we went to this ginormous desk I have here in what would otherwise be the pool room. And I'll never forget, we sat in this exact position, except I was
opposite.
Over there.
That's right.
Opposite.
I remember
Did you realize
so
that?
clearly. Yeah. I think it actually was right here.
That's right. And here we are years later having this conversation, but you stayed in the pocket and continued to walk through that terrain that felt like quicksand. I'm never going to forget it. And I knew you were going to be free.
That was one of those moments in time where there was a shift. I'll call it a shift. I'll just call it a shift. But how the shift came into being was that you held up a mirror to me. You were able to reflect back. This is why you can't do this alone, people. You were able to just not tell me anything, not counsel us around anything. You held up a mirror, essentially, and it reflected back what was happening, and it unlocked something in me, and it gave me the courage to continue to persevere. And this is what I want to say about prevailing perseverance. I like to ask people when I meet them, if you put your whole life in a book, what would the title of your book be? And it's so interesting to get the different reactions from people, because I believe life happens from us. It's from the heart flow the issues of life. And while there's a lot of things that happen to us externally, it is what's going on inside of us internally and how we govern that determines our level of freedom. And the reason I would call my own story prevailing perseverance is because I persevered for many years. I was exhausted. I didn't have any more perseverance left in me. It was where the prevailing perseverance came through was in moments like that, where I started to see who I really was. The good, the bad, and the ugly, by the way. To actually see, have it brought into the light of what was. Because we can't get to what's next until we have a revelation and we know what is. It's really important.
So good. So good. You did all the hard work. You stepped into freedom. Something that I repeatedly say is, I'm not a therapist and I'm not a conventional counselor. I'm an educator, according to the state of California, a thought leader and a curriculum developer. And what I do is discipleship counseling, which is instructional in nature, because we reason together, right? So we put everything we have on the table, and then we begin to put these beautiful pieces together. And I do have technology that I use, and I have all kinds of resources I use to verify the merit of these narratives that are developing as we speak, to see if they're true or false. Because it's really the lies we believe about ourselves.
Absolutely.
And you're big on that.
I'm huge on that.
Cause the greatest destruction.
Yeah.
And not to get too thick spiritually, But we do have an enemy. We do have an adversary who comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And the only way he can do that is through lies that
and
we
our
believe.
agreement with those lies.
And our agreements with those lies.
Hear this.
But the lies about ourselves, each other, and the situations we're dealing with. So there's layers and dimensions to these lies. It's not a linear concept. It's complex. And that's why the spirit, the soul, and the body, and understanding that becomes important.
Right. There is an order to it. It's not linear, but there's an order to our being. There's an order to it. And that was the unlocking for me in the knowing of who I am, not what I do, not what I look like, not where I live, not what other people think about me, but who I actually am. And so much of the work that's done at R.E.S.T really does unlock that reality, the truth of who we are and the world that we live in and how it all works together. And
the inner workings, yes.
We're powerful beings. We are powerful beings, and we get to decide what we're going to do with what, there's, an ancient saying that in this world, you will have trouble. Nobody escapes it. And it's not like one person's trauma is worse than, say, another person's trauma. It's how you hold that trauma in your body and how long you hold that trauma in your body that gives us the results that we have. And you can overcome. You can overcome. You don't have to remain a victim.
No.
That's a lie. You actually are powerful, but not in your own strength.
And recognizing the reality of victimhood is not a weakness. It requires meekness. Meekness is strength under control. Weakness is crumbling.
Yes, that's super good.
Right. And when you deny that, in fact, it was abusive, it was chaotic, it was destructive, it was harmful, it was hurtful, I didn't know where to breathe. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do other than fight back or disappear, whatever it is, right? Or please, in some cases. That's still because... Or hide. That's right. The point is that if you don't negotiate that fact with meekness and humility, you always talk about humility, then you can't heal.
Yeah.
So these are positions that courageous people that begin to think in unconventional ways and are resolved to persevere and prevail, to your point, Leslie, that's where victory is found. That's where triumph is found in saying, I'm going to rise up against conventional thinking. Mental health is the number one health crisis in America today. So why would I want to continue to go through conventional methods to heal when what I really need is to persevere, knowing that I have all the resources to prevail?
Yeah.
So you have the final word on this.
Yeah, I would just say that's that soul sickness. And some people out there,
what is soul sickness?
That's soul sickness, where there's so many wounds that have been perpetuated against our life. Right? It's our life. That's our soul is mixed with the spirit of a man is our life, and we take hits. And again,
got to flesh them out.
You got to flesh them out. And some people might be thinking, man, I'm tired. I don't have any more strength to fight. And that's actually a really good place to be. And I don't mean that from the conventional, I'm in a place of surrender. We don't even understand the word surrender. In our modern vernacular, when you hear the word surrender, you think, even if you look it up in the dictionary, it's I give up and I wave the white flag and I relinquish, this is important, I relinquish all of my control to another. But in our secular understanding of the word surrender, if you read on, it's I surrender to an enemy. Whoa. We also hate the word submit because we don't know what it means. Who in their right mind would surrender to an enemy? Nobody in their right mind would do that. And that's why we struggle so much with what that word is. You're not alone in this. And you do need help. And there is help. God is real. And this was the final straw, if you will, of busting into a place of freedom around addiction for me was that every time I kept getting pulled back into it, it was because I was doing it alone, hear this, in my own strength. If I work hard at this, if I just do, hear me, do all the things that convention are telling me to do, then I will be able to control, I will be able to manage the chaos that is always inside of me, instead of unlocking that and tapping into that truth, that spirit that tells me who I am. That's my power source.
And what Leslie just described is the function of liberty.
Yes.
Negotiating that transaction within your soul, your mind, your heart, your will, your conscience, and your feelings. Feelings, remember, in all this is a function of the soul. What we emote is different. That's a function of the limbic system. It's a function of the brain. So understanding that transaction becomes really important, so you are not taken captive and live in the bondage of your limited understanding of submission and surrender. That is not the biblical model of submission. Is meekness, strength, under control, and surrendering. It is not that you're willing to do it, it's to what are you willing to submit or surrender to
or to who in the divine question. Who?
So is it people or tangible, external, carnal things, or is it to this quiet, still voice, this thing that is continuously trying to speak life into your life?
I will close with this.
Thank you.
There's 3 questions that must, and I do mean must, be answered if you are going to walk in the wholeness, in freedom of who you are. And the first question is who is God? You have to know that. You have to know that. And so many people, whether they were raised in any kind of religious environment or not, there is that inherent need to know who the Creator is, because the Creator breathed us into existence. He spoke the universe into existence, and He breathed His very character and nature into the dirt of the ground, and He created a living being. He created a soul, us. And so our identity comes from our Creator. Actually, the etymology of God, that word Father, means source. And so if we will explore with curiosity and an open heart on just erase everything that you think you know about God, especially if you've got bad thoughts around that God's mean or He's punishing. Like, I encourage you to freshly approach this question. To Virginia's point, that still small voice, get quiet and ask, who are you, God? This is a great exercise. God, what do you want me to know about you today? Leslie, I want you to know. And you just start writing what you hear, sense, see, with engage your whole being in that. And the second question that has to be answered is, who am I? And we can't honestly and truthfully answer that question until we've got the first question answered, because you were created in the image of God. You're an image bearer of the Creator of the universe. And to know that He's good and He loves you is to be able to say, yeah, I'm a reflection of that. I'm lovable. And I am here, which is the third question. Why am I here? What's my purpose? I believe it's to love. And that opens up a whole other lifelong pursuit of what is that? How do I be that? You've got to know, you've got to embody it, be, and then your doing in life flows out of your being. It flows out of your who-ness.
So good. Leslie, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's
I always
been a joy.
knew something special was going to come out of our work together. And it's amazing to see you sit across from me. You glow now, and you're impacting the lives of thousands and thousands of people. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, everyone. For updates about R.E.S.T and this podcast, please visit our Instagram or Facebook, The Place of R.E.S.T. If you'd like more information about Virginia or to support and join the cause of R.E.S.T, please go to virginiadixon.com/collaborate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to R.E.S.T with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.